It's Sunday, August 13th, 2017, and today we're joined by one of our mentors, Vikas Batra. He's a director of strategy over at Nokia, and he's going to be leading a talk today on developing strategy for product managers. For those of you who are maybe joining us for the first time today, allow me to briefly explain the format. This is one of those things from the Product Mentor program that we like to open it up to the rest of the world. The people you see along the bottom of your screen are mentors and mentees within the current session of the Product Mentor. And each of our mentors in the Product Mentor program, where they get paired up with one mentee for the duration of about 6 months to help make better product people, better product decisions, and also, better products at the same time. What each of the mentors does is they do a live talk in an area that they're particularly expert in. And because there's so many people that want to participate in the program, or it takes so long to get into the program, or you might just not qualify for this type of program, we still like to open up all this information to everybody, to as many people as possible. And so that's how you might also be joining us. You might be at theproductmentor.com/live joining us today for our live stream. And we like to just open it up. As you have questions, post them to that Slido channel and that Q&A section you see below the YouTube video on theproductmentor.com/live. As the questions come in, I'll pass them along to Vikas in a fairly real-time manner. I usually let him finish his thought before I jump in. So what I'd like to do very quickly is just kind of go around the room with some quick introductions. I'm going to start with the image that's directly to my left. And when you guys introduce yourself, what's your name? Are you a mentor or mentee? And anything else a little about yourself that you might want to add. So first, I'll just start with Vikas.
Thanks, Jeremy. My name is Vikas Batra, and I'm a mentor here. I've been doing this for quite some time. This is my 5th season doing it. I've enjoyed doing it. And my talk today will be about how product managers could develop strategy and thereby make more successful products.
Outstanding. And now we'll go to Rashid.
My name is Rashid Manzar, and I'm a mentee. I'm based out of Canada, and I'm working as a product manager at ADP.
Ooh, that's a good one to add. I always ask that. And also say where you are from when I come to you. And we'll go to Lee.
Hey guys, I'm a mentee from Melbourne, and I am session 7 of Product Mentor Group, and I'm a product manager for a company that develops SaaS products for hospitality industry.
Shirzad, I will have you quickly introduce yourself. Are you a mentor or a mentee, and where are you? And tell us a little bit about yourself. And then as soon as you do that, don't forget to mute yourself, and then we'll get started.
All right. So if you can hear me, of course. Hi, everyone. I'm Shirzad. I'm based out of Berlin. I'm a product manager at Here Technologies, and I'm a mentee.
Outstanding. So we're going to get going. And also, I am Jeremy Horn, a.k.a. the product guy. I'll be moderating here today and hopefully feeding along all your awesome questions to Vikas. Thank you guys for joining us. But with all that said, let me hand it over to Vikas to take it away about developing strategy for product managers.
All right. Thanks, Jeremy. So let's get started here. In many organizations, the product management function has a role on developing strategy. And that function of developing strategy becomes more critical as you go higher up within the product management organization. That function is critical for the success of the product, particularly if the product is a new product, or if with an existing product you're trying to penetrate a new market. So my talk today, I will talk about what is strategy, how you could go about developing product strategy, if that's part of your role, and how you could benefit from product strategy, even if that's not part of your role, meaning defining it is not part of your role. And I would consider my talk successful if each one of you here today walks out after this call with at least one thing that you can go back and apply to your jobs. So let's get started with what is strategy. Essentially, if you look at strategy, strategy has 2 pieces to it. One is the aspiration. How do you define success? Where do you want to be? And the second piece of it is choosing what actions we do in order to realize that aspiration. It's all about choices, making the choices. It's distinctively different from execution, which involves implementing or executing those choices. And the one thing that I want to make everybody to get out of this is that you should not consider strategy to be more or less important than execution. They're both needed for successful product. So there are a lot of definitions of strategy. One of the definitions that I like is strategy as a fit. It's a fit between the external environment and your internal capabilities. Because you're trying to realize your aspiration within an environment that's external to you, and you generally do not have much control to change that. But you have your internal capabilities with which you're again trying to realize that aspiration that you have a greater control of, that you can adapt. So the idea here of a strategy as a fit is to see how you need to adapt, how you need to modify within the environment, which by the way will keep on evolving as well, such that you can realize your aspiration. So how do we go about making that fit? So you develop a strategy on that. And clearly, first of all, you have to define what your aspiration is. The other important piece of strategy is understanding that environment that you're in. How is that environment today? So you have to have really good awareness of that. How is it evolving over time? Like I said, it doesn't stay constant. It keeps on changing all the time. And how would it respond to your actions to realize your aspirations? You have to understand all of that. On the internal side, you have to understand what your capabilities are, which could be your strengths, your weaknesses, not just what you have today, but what your potential is there. What strengths can you develop? What weaknesses can you overcome? And so on. Given those three, you then have to identify the options. Okay, so given what our aspiration is, given what the market is, given what our capabilities are, what can we do? What are the options on what we can do? Identify options. And this step may seem straightforward, but oftentimes it requires deep thinking to uncover options. Once you identify the options, then it's about analyzing it and making choices out of those options. So strategy is all about making choices on what to do and implicitly what not to do. And then depending on the role, you could either be making choices or you could be making recommendation and somebody else is making the choices. Now, strategy has various levels or context. You could have strategy at a country level. You could have strategy for a corporation, corporate strategy. You could have strategy for a given function within a corporation, for example, marketing strategy. You could have strategy for a product across all functions, product strategy, which is what we're going to talk about today. And you could even have the strategy at an individual level. At an individual level, you could have some aspirations that you can look at the environment you're in, look at the capabilities that you have, and identify options and choose options. So the key thing to note here also is that if you're in a large organization, you would have corporate strategy, you could have business groups that could have their own strategy, and your product would be sitting within that business group. So it kind of cascades down in large organizations. And one thing that as part of developing product strategy is to make sure that your product strategy is aligned with the business unit strategy or business group, and that business group strategy should in turn be aligned with the corporate strategy. So there's a cascading impact in large organizations. So this is a basic high-level background on what is strategy. Now let's get into product strategy, which is what we are here to talk about today. And to describe product strategy, there's a framework that I like. And the framework essentially says your product strategy should answer all these questions. We'll go through each of these questions one by one. in no more than 4 or 5 pages. So there's a lot of information that generally goes into creating product strategy, but the idea here is to crystallize it, get the essence of it, and capture it in no more than 4 or 5 pages. So let's start with the first question, which covers around what is the aspiration that we have. And that aspiration often ties to what difference the product is aspiring to make externally. Every product has to make a difference to somebody's life. And if your product is not making a difference to anybody's life, well, why is the product existing to begin with? So that has to be captured as to what that difference is. Is it taking away somebody's pain? Is it making something easier, faster, more enjoyable? Whatever that is, that has to be captured. You would also have, in addition to that, your internal objectives. Most of the products come from for-profit organizations, and there is a financial motive as well around making profit while making the difference. So there could be financial internal objectives, there could be other objectives around increasing market share, increasing number of users that are using, increasing the amount of time users spend on your product, and so on and so forth. If you are in a non-profit organization, you could have internal objectives around making an impact to the society. Whatever those may be, those have to get that captured in the strategy. Once you've captured that, the next question the strategy answers is, who are we making the difference to? Of all the people, businesses, organizations that are there in the world, whom do we choose to make the difference? And that covers geography, demography, customer segments, based on either income level, age group, so on and so forth. Then it should answer, how will these selected set of people or organization, which we call as target audience, how will they even know that the product exists and can make the difference? Other question it has to answer is, how would the product get to the audience? If it's a physical product, this becomes critical. It should also answer that once it reaches your target audience, why will they select the product over other alternatives that may making the same difference? Once the target audience selects your product, will he or she be able to actually use the product? Will the difference that you are aspiring to make actually be made, even after the target audience decides to use the product? And in parallel, while you're doing all of that, how will the product meet the internal objectives? How do you measure and track whether the difference is being made and the internal objectives are being met? And what capabilities do we need internally within the organization to make it all happen? So basic set of questions, nothing too complicated about them. Those are the questions that the strategy or the product strategy has to answer. So how do we go about developing the answers to these questions? So that's the piece of developing product strategy. Now I'll step into it, and as I step into each one of these, I will also mention some of the jargon around it. There's a lot of jargon around it, which you may find scary at times, but at the end of it, it's all pretty simple trying to answer these questions. So let's look at each one of these one by one. So as you capture the aspiration, it has to be captured in a way that is pretty simple. A layman should be able to understand it. You have to also define it such that it's measurable and trackable. Make it time bound if you can. And it's okay to keep it over 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever the time interval will be. But clearly capture the difference that you're making to the person using it, which also gets captured as value proposition, and clearly capture the internal objectives that you're trying to meet. The next piece around who the target audience is called a segmentation. And this is a critical piece of your strategy, because here you're choosing first how you're segmenting, meaning you're taking the whole population of this planet and population of all the organizations as well, and you're segmenting them in the sense, okay, we will make a difference with people with certain attribute. What is that attribute upon which you're segmenting it? So that's one piece that you have to determine. Then you have to determine of the segments that you have, which one is really attractive. The segment attractiveness analysis can be critical in the success of a product. So how do you go about defining these customer segments? There are the traditional attributes that I've talked about: geography, age, income level, so on and so forth. But you don't have to use those attributes. You can define your own attributes, and that those attributes come from traits that your customers value. And then value so much, ideally, that you think that would make your product compelling enough to be used by them. So let me give an example here. How do we go about doing this? So I take an example from consumer goods industry around the soap Tide, or the detergent Tide. We all know Tide is the leading detergent in the leading detergent used in washing clothes. And while that was going on, a competitor came, Gain, and they segmented the market based on a customer attribute of fragrance. What kind of fragrance is left in the clothes after the washing is done? And they created a segment on that of the people who care about fragrance, and created a product that targeted that segment. And even till today, and this was, I think, quite a few years ago, even till today, they control that segment. So there is no, in this case, there's no literature around it that would tell you that, okay, segment on this attribute. It's just an attribute that you have to pick from your customer base by realizing that, yes, they care about fragrance, and then create a segment and create a product that goes after that segment. As part of segment attractiveness, you also have to look at what is the competition in the segment that you're going after. And sometimes what happens is, if you could look at a large segment, you could look at competition in that segment and say, this segment is not attractive enough. But you have to look closely. You have to look closely within that large segment if you can find pockets of sub-segments, if you will, that are more attractive. You could also look at what technical innovations are happening that could make a certain segment, which was earlier unattractive, that the innovation makes it attractive. You also could look at if there is any kind of discontinuity happening in the marketplace that could open up a segment which was earlier considered unattractive. The key thing that I want to mention here also is that in terms of the segmentation has to be based on attributes that customers value. And it is your job to figure out what is it that the customers value. Just asking them, what do you value, will not give you the answers. It has to be figured out. So once you've figured out how you're segmenting it and which segment you're targeting, you now have to go to the next stage of how will the selected segment learn about your product. And that's where your marketing and advertising comes into play. And it is clearly directly related from that. Depending on the segment that you're going after would determine the kind of advertising strategy that you use to reach out to them. In addition to that, the segmentation will also drive how physically the product reaches them. And that's really important, as I mentioned, if the product is a physical product and not a digital product. The segment, the geography, the trait that you're looking for in the target customers, that should drive where the product physically becomes available. The next thing is, once the product becomes available to the target audience, why would they choose your product? And this is what is called as differentiation. And a lot of effort has gone into it because the situation that we are here in today, most of the products or most of the needs are being met by multiple products. So why an end consumer or your target audience picks your product over a competitor's products becomes critical. So some of the questions.
So Vikas, we have a question that just came in from Rashid. So I'm going to hand it over to Rashid to ask his question.
So, hi Vikas. During the initial part of your conversation, you mentioned that there is defining a strategy and developing a strategy, and defining a strategy is not part of your role. Could you please share some examples to explain the difference between defining and developing strategy with respect to PM role?
So, okay, maybe it came across like this. Defining and developing strategy are used interchangeably.
Okay.
So I don't see them as difference. The difference happens in the role around whether either you're part of defining or developing strategy, or you're not. You're more focused on the execution.
Okay.
So that was the difference I was trying to draw. And if to dig a little bit deeper, so for example, in some organizations that are following Agile, if you are a product owner role, for example, and then you have somebody else who's more of a business product manager, the business product manager may be looking at developing the product strategy, whereas the product owner may be more focused on executing on the backlog that is coming out of that strategy. So again, I'm talking at a product strategy level. Like I said, strategies are at different levels. So you could look at within a product owner's job as well. He could have his strategy at his level too.
Okay.
So that's what I'm at a product strategy level. I'm saying within product management, there are some individuals or some groups within the product management functions that are responsible for creating it, and there are certain groups who primary responsibility is executing on them.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
Great. And so that's all the questions we have at the moment. We'll keep the questions coming in, keep them posting to the productmentor.com/live. And also, Vikas, when you do share, if it's possible for you to hide that display along the bottom of the screen, that thing, that message that says you're hiding, that would be wonderful. Thanks, and take it away.
Okay. So coming back to differentiation, so there's a lot of literature and strategy around how do we go about differentiating. But the key question here that you have to ask yourself in a very, very genuine and objective way, that will your target audience pick your product over the alternatives that they have? In a truly objective way. And if you do not have an answer with a reasonable level of confidence to that, you need to do more work to figure that out. So how do we go about differentiating? So the first thing I want to tell you is that you got to look at competition. What is competition doing there? But just copying competition will not give you the differentiation. You have to oftentimes you have to look into more deeper customer needs and see how those deeper customer needs can be addressed that could create an opportunity of differentiation. So let me give an example. So for example, if you're a drill making companies, and you look at the drill to say, hey, does the customer need a drill or does the customer need a hole? The customer doesn't need a drill, the customer needs a hole. So the need is customer needs a hole. But if you dig deeper, why is the customer needing to dig the hole? Well, he really needs to drill the hole to hang a painting. So he doesn't really need to dig the hole, he just needs to hang the painting. Now, if you come with an alternate product that allows the consumer to hang the painting through a different mechanism, let's say a Velcro mechanism, that avoids the hassle and the inconvenience using a drill, you're meeting the same need with a different product. And you're differentiating, in this case, by offering a product that does not have the hassle of drilling it and the dust goes around and so on and so forth. But you could dig even deeper. The need is not just to hang a painting. The need is to make the room look more aesthetic. And that need can also be met, for example, by getting a painting onto the television screen, which is there already, which is what Google Chromecast does naturally. So if you have a situation where you're putting the painting because you have visitors coming in your room and you need a nice aesthetic picture, instead you're meeting the same need by Chromecast, where you put the picture on the TV and then the picture keeps on swapping itself every so often as well. So you're not even getting one picture, but different picture at the same time. And here's an alternate product, differentiated, meeting the same needs, but completely differentiated. All the way from the drill to getting the product onto Chromecast. So that's an example as to how you dig deeper into the more fundamental need to determine how you could address the same need in a different way and thereby creating a differentiation. Another point I want to make here is differentiation versus creating new markets. So like I said, a lot of literature is there in strategy around differentiating, and a lot of organizations with their products also tend to focus on differentiation. But there is an alternate school of thought which says that instead of trying to differentiate and meet the known needs of your target segment, you identify the needs that have not been met by anybody. In other words, trying to meet those needs that have not been identified, or if they have been identified, those are not being met today at all. And in this case, the argument there is that you're going after an uncontested market space, so to speak, because nobody is actually trying to meet the need at all. So let me give an example. One of the examples there is the conceptualization of the minivan. So before the minivan was created, there were SUVs, there were sedans, coupe, and so on and so forth. But there was this unmet need, so to speak, of families with small kids, and that created this minivan, a new product category with doors that slide out, with features like much lower level of the floor, so young kids can climb up easily, with a switch for the driver, so the driver can switch off or close the door without having to step out of the seat, and so on and so forth. So in this case, Chrysler in this case created a completely new, what we call as a product category, by addressing needs that were not being met by anybody else at all. So moving to the next one around the target audience being able to use the product. So the point I want to make here is that if you look at 5, maybe 10 years ago, a lot of the focus on this was on products delivering certain utility, certain benefit to the end, to their target audience. And as long as that benefit is delivered, you met your objective. But more recently, it has also gone to a point where it's not just delivering utility, but also what kind of feelings and what kind of emotional experience is being delivered to the target audience while you're delivering that utility. And more, especially in the technology product, more and more the focus has shifted towards delivering not just utility, but utility along with a certain emotional experience. and that's so that user experience to me is part of whether the target is being to able to use the product and whether the product is able to deliver the kind of emotional experience that you're wanting to deliver. So moving on to the next one, how will the product, is the product meeting the internal objectives? So this is where it ties on to your monetization. If it is, if you're running a for-profit product, what would be the price be? What would be the pricing model be? Will it be direct monetization or indirect monetization, so on and so forth? All those questions have to get answered by this. And if you are a non-for-profit organization, then what is the impact that you're trying to make, and how is this product making that impact that you're trying to make? Measuring and tracking the difference and achieving the internal objectives. So here there are a lot of options. You could think of a lot of metrics. You could look at product usage metrics. You could look at net promoter score metrics. But you have to pick 4 or 5 critical metrics that give the overall view. Think of it like a dashboard view. And these metrics objectively tell you that the difference is being made and the internal objectives are being made. So a lot of times you would come up with these metrics, but you would not have the capabilities to measure this, which is fine, but then you have to make a call whether you need to develop certain capabilities or certain systems to be able to measure those metrics. The other alternate is to look at what is being collected already. So for example, if you're looking at financial metrics, your CFO organization might be collecting those metrics at your product level already, in which case you can then reuse them. But essentially, the key here is to get those critical metrics and measure them and track them. Because as Bill Gates says, whatever gets measured gets improved. If you're not even measuring it or tracking it, you don't even know whether you're improving it or you're actually making those metrics worse. The final piece is, what capabilities do we need to make it all happen?
So we just had some more questions come in. So the first one's from someone anonymous, and they're asking if strategy definition is ultimately the role of your boss or your boss's boss, how do you suggest introducing your own strategy viewpoints to them?
Correct. So I'm talking a little bit further in the next section about it. And in terms of whose role it is to develop product strategy, it's if you're in the product management function, you should see it as part of your job, whether you own it or you don't own it. Your boss may own it, or his boss's boss may own it, or you may have a parallel organization that may own it, but it is still your job to contribute towards it and work towards it. And I'll touch upon it in the subsequent section.
All right. And the next question comes from John. John's asking, in large organizations, how do you achieve alignment on strategy? Oh, yeah. I see the note for Jeremy. My audio doesn't work. I got it now. I'm good.
I would just say hold on to it because I cover that in the next section as well. Right now, I'm just going through the process of developing strategy, what you need to do to come up with that strategy, and then I'll touch upon other areas, including how do we socialize it and get alignment.
Excellent. So awesome. That's all the questions I have at the moment. Keep them coming in at theproductmentor.com/live, and we'll keep passing them along to Vikas. With that said, back to you, Vikas.
Okay. So I was at the last point around what capabilities do we need to make it all happen, and this this is where the strategy has to identify what capabilities do we need, and then that has to funnel into the execution plans. And that execution plan could be a roadmap, for example, for the R&D organization. It could be a marketing plan for the marketing organization, sales plan, and so on and so forth. But the whole idea here is that when you develop this strategy and you find answers or you pick options in each one of these areas, it is your job as a product strategy developer to make sure that these options are consistent across amongst themselves, and then these consistent options are driving the functional plans and making sure that the functional plans are also consistent among themselves. Especially large organization, you can run the risk of these different functional groups running in their own individual silos, if you will, trying to optimize within that silo, but then not necessarily consistent or coherent with the other functional areas within the organization. So that's where product strategy role comes in, to keep those functional plans consistent and aligned. The other thing that I want to mention here is that as you develop this strategy, you would come up with these actions that have to be taken. You also have to look at, as you take those actions in the market, how will the marketplace evolve? How will the competition react to it, for example? And then you have to anticipate, in some cases, how will it respond? And then how would you respond to that? It's almost like game of chess. If you take this move, they could make that move, the other move. If they make that other move, then you would make that move, and so on and so forth. So you have to think through those possible future moves and be prepared, or think through, if those future moves happen, then what a different set of options you will pick within these areas, and how those different set of options that you pick will continue to help you achieve the aspiration that you're aiming to achieve. So that's at a high level, how you go about developing strategy. Now I move into the next section. Like I said, how you individually could benefit from product strategy. And how you benefit would depend on what your current role is. You could either be in a role where you're not developing strategy, but you aspire to develop that, and I'll touch upon what you could do in that kind of a role. Or you could be in the product strategy execution role, not so much in defining, like I mentioned earlier. Or you could be developing product strategy. And I picked developing product strategy at the very end purposely, because if you are in that role, then the discussion gets a lot more detailed, because you can get a lot more detailed in each of those areas, what are the options, and so on and so forth. But I still wanted to cover more on the first two roles. So what if you're aspiring to develop product strategy, but today you're not? So the first thing you do is you connect with whoever is developing product strategy, and share with them that you aspire to do that. And from their perspective, when they're developing product strategy, they would probably know, most likely know, that in order to develop a good strategy, they need broad perspective from different areas. And if they find somebody else who's aspiring to contribute, they could possibly include in any kind of discussions, workshop, or whatever method they use in developing strategy, they could use you and get your perspective into the mix. So that's first thing. The other thing is you have to develop your skills in being able to develop a product strategy. So how do you improve your skills such that they find you attractive enough? And the way to improve that skill is actually by doing it. At least that's my view. You can read about it. There are a whole lot of frameworks around strategy. There's a lot of literature. But to me, there's a whole lot of learning that happens when you actually develop your strategy for your product. So what I would recommend in that situation would be to follow the framework that I mentioned and go ahead and create a 4 or 5 page strategy for your product based on what you know. So list the strategy on all those dimensions that I talked about earlier, and then objectively assess it. Are those options the right set of options in order to realize the aspiration? Are there gaps in there? Are there things that you think should be done but are not being done? Or are there things that shouldn't be done but are being done? So create that, and that creation of the strategy document will help a long way in developing your skill. Once you've done that, socialize it. Socialize it again with the product strategy team or your peers and say, this is what I think we are. What do you think? And that would help you broaden your perspective. It may highlight areas that you're not either aware of or you haven't thought about, and so on. The next thing to do is to get a better sense of your business strategy. And what I mean by business strategy is the strategy that at a higher level, depending on your organization, it could be a portfolio, or a business group or a corporate strategy. Understand that, because your product strategy is within that strategy and it has to be aligned. So as you develop a better understanding of that, it puts you in a better position to be able to develop your product strategy aligned with that. And the other thing you could do is to develop really deep understanding of your target customer. Because at the end of it, a lot of the strategy work is driven by the customer insights that you have. And having that customer insight or that deep understanding of the customer in itself can be a differentiator. On the contrary, if your organization has poor understanding of the target customer compared to your competition, then at best, it would be a disadvantage. And at worst, it could kill the product. And if it's a single product company, it could even potentially kill the company. So develop that understanding. How do you go about developing that? So there are various ways you can go about developing it. It just depends on the situation. But if I were to put on a continuum, what are the possible ways and what are the easiest ways? Beginning first, which give you the least insight, and going up, difficult, but giving you more insight. So you could start with internet and see what information about your target customers on the internet. You could look at analyst reports, which give you a little bit more insights. You could attend events and meet a lot of people at the events and develop a better understanding. Going a deeper level further, meet with your customers and talk to them. And going the final level, which is actually observing the customers. That's where you can get the most insights. See how they're using it. If it's a software product, see how they're installing it, when they're installing it, how exactly they're using it. This is where you will get the real insight.
So Vikas, we just had another question come in from Jordan. So let me hand it over to him to ask his question.
Hey Vikas, how you doing? My question is in your experience, is there a obvious or even tangible difference between the way people talk about their product strategy versus the product roadmap itself, or is one just a deliverable of the other?
Yeah, so the way I visualize it, to me, product roadmap is derived out of the strategy, and product roadmap is to me more of a execution plan that tells what the R&D organization will do in a given time frame. So the way I look at it, that the product roadmap should be driven off of the product strategy. Does that answer that question, Jordan?
Fair enough. Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Awesome. That's all the questions we have at the moment. Keep them coming into the productmentor.com/live. And man, we got to buy Vikas a new hard drive. Let me hand it back to Vikas.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. So moving to the next role we talked about, if your role is that of executing product strategy, how can you benefit from it? The first step is to clearly understand what the strategy is. The more you understand it, better you'll be able to make your own decisions, for example, as to what goes in the roadmap and what doesn't go in the roadmap. So the next step is to align your execution plans. And I gave the example of a roadmap, but if you are part of a marketing organization or if you're part of the sales teams, align whatever execution plan you own to your product strategy. The other thing you can benefit from is to communicate that strategy to your team. Communicating that is telling the execution team, let's say developers in your case, as to why we are doing what we are doing. And it often lends more meaning to their jobs and thereby increases their level of engagement and level of motivation. It also helps that certain smaller decisions that they may be making on their side, they can make better decisions because they are aware of the overall product strategy and whether the smaller decisions are aligned with the strategy or they're not aligned with the strategy. The other thing that you could benefit from is providing your inputs to the people who are developing product strategy, as I was mentioning earlier. And don't underestimate the amount of contribution you can give. Because oftentimes what happens is people doing product strategy development are more market focused and they're not as close to technical innovations. Innovations, like I mentioned earlier on, that could make certain segments more attractive than they were or make them attractive enough to be chased without those innovations. And so go ahead and share what you see and in terms of the technical innovation, also in terms of the organizational capabilities with them so that they can adjust the product strategy accordingly. You should also seek input from your teams on those two dimensions because they may have a better view than you do. And the idea here is that structurally you want to have a mechanism where these inputs are going all the way into the product strategy development team so that they can develop a more refined strategy. And finally, if you're developing a product strategy itself, getting buy-in and getting buy-in into the strategy and also aligning the respective functional execution plan is a critical piece of it. And one way to do that is to involve the people in the actual development of strategy. It should be that the execution team feels that it is their strategy, not something put together by the strategy team and dumped on them. So that's one way to get buy-in, and you have to have that culture all during the cycle. So for example, when you conduct reviews or you set up these meetings around it, even if you change the title to getting feedback on strategy as opposed to communicating the strategy, small things can also help in getting that buy-in and getting that alignment. The other thing on getting the buy-in is distinguish between what data you have and what hypothesis you're putting in product strategy. And often your product strategy will have some data and some hypothesis. Consciously keep them separate and say, this is the data, and we don't have the rest of the data, and we're making a hypothesis. And a lot of times, once you share the data, you would get the buy-in based on the data that you have. And a lot of times, even if the data is not there, you explicitly acknowledge the hypothesis. That itself could also get buy-in that, yes, we know it's a hypothesis because we don't have the data around it. Coming back to the reviews again.
We had a question that just came in. If you have any different target customer, small, medium, and large enterprise, do you define a strategy per target customer or a strategy that is applicable across all types?
Depends what your product is.
And Vikas, to you.
Depends what your product is, and if you have multiple segments that you're targeting at the same time with one product, then yes, then your product strategy has to cover both segments. If you're defining a strategy at a segment level, which oftentimes you don't, then you would cover just one. But if your product is going after two segments, you have to have one strategy covering both the segments, because all the other options that I talked about could be different across the two segments.
Excellent. So all the questions we have at the moment, keep them coming in. theproductmentor.com/live. Back to you.
Okay. So the other piece around doing strategy reviews. So you have to do these reviews very often because the market keeps on changing frequently, and you should always keep on evolving your strategy document. And some of the questions to go over the reviews is around: are we really realizing our aspirations? Are there opportunities that are out there related to unmet customer needs that we could chase? What are the most promising technical innovations out there? What are the key threats which competitor is really troubling us the most. That's the kind of conversation you want to have in the reviews, and not just sharing, okay, this is the new strategy and what do we think. And finally, I stress this again, developing the deep understanding of the target customer. Because customer understanding or customer insights is at the heart of it. And if there is one thing that you can take out of this session today is to do whatever you can at an individual level, organization level, structurally, to gather, capture, disseminate, and utilize customer insights within the organization to do that. Because that in itself can be a big difference in making your product successful. Back to you, Jeremy.
Awesome. Thank you very much to our speaker, Vikas Batra, Director of Strategy over at Nokia, for today's talk on developing strategy for product managers. And as always, the presentation will be posted to our SlideShare channel. And also a big thank you from me, Jeremy Horn, the product guy, and everyone else who joined us today, and the product mentor. And also, if you're interested in being a product mentor, because heck, we can never have too many, like today's speaker, Vikas, to product people of all sorts, please visit theproductmentor.com and sign up today. And also, if you're looking to fill a new product job with a great product person, visit our very own free-for-all job board at theproductjobs.com. And I know what I'm buying you for Christmas, Vikas. It's going to be a hard drive. It'll be SSD. That is the loudest hard drive I've ever heard. But everyone, guys, thank you guys for joining, and I'll see you guys all next time.